Hi, you're listening to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions. What that means is we get short stories, we select those short stories, and then we discuss them specifically about the ethics and the morality of the choices the characters and the situations put us in. Why did you do this? What makes you do this? What makes us good people? What's the nature of truth, goodness, all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we're all better, smarter people for it and learn a little bit about why we think the way we think. So thank you for listening.
Welcome back once again to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. I'm your co-host. I'm your co-host Colby here with Jeremy.
Hi.
Hey, Jeremy. And again, we are without Sarah or Ashley because we recorded these back to back. So it's not like they took 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off. It's just that we recorded them back to back. So they're busy doing their own things. And so last time we got really we're way too serious without them. I feel like that's a failing of ours. This is why we need better human
Some
beings.
temperance.
We need temperance in our lives. Yeah. At any rate, like and subscribe. Support us on Patreon. We've got a book out. We've got 4 books out actually, and a monthly magazine you can get for $1.95 a month. At our website,
AfterDinnerConversations.com. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I did a really long explanation for our last story. Do you want to do the explanation for this one? A Wolf on the Bus by Matthew Wallace?
Yes.
Cool.
So, right. So in this story, this is, we're presented, the narrator is a man who apparently works at like a Social Security Administration kind of office. They don't really get into that much. But he is on a bus riding either to work or
like a public city bus or something?
Right. Public city bus.
Okay.
And he is, it's interesting. He spends the first couple of pages really talking about, how much he hates being on the bus, how much he hates making eye contact with people, and how much time he spends avoiding that. And that he keeps getting distracted and finds himself staring at people, making eye contact. So anyways, he's on this bus and, at some point they come to a stop and a wolf in people's clothing.
Not a metaphor, an actual wolf.
Walks onto the bus, holding his bag, and sits down next to the lady with the baby, who gets up and moves a couple seats over.
Yeah.
And just sitting there minding his own business.
Yeah.
And the bus moves on. And there, some talk, the narrator talks about, what this is about, kind of presents that he's not, he doesn't necessarily have a bias against wolves, but there's some talk about that. Like, why is he on this bus?
Hasn't he said like he heard rumors about them or like he's heard the stories or something like that?
Right. And it's clearly an allegory for a person of color or some minority that is.
I have a huge question for you about that, but I'm going to wait till you finish the explanation.
Okay. So next stop, 2 bros get on, very obviously douchebags, sit next to the wolf, start harassing him, in a very similar fashion that, we've seen in other media.
Sure.
But basically harassing this wolf. And at some point, the narrator gets up and tells them to shut up and leave him
because the wolf doesn't defend himself at all.
Right. The wolf is not defending himself to all of this harassment.
Yeah.
Do
they ever touch him? Yes. Or I know they taunt him.
One of them asks a question and the other guy hits him on the head and says, "Hey, he asked you a question."
Okay. So there is some physical assault.
Harassment.
Yeah. Okay.
And at this point, the narrator gets up, defends the wolf, tells those guys they need to leave, and they're like, well, this is our stop anyways. And, it's a confrontation between the narrator and these 2 guys.
Okay.
The 2 guys get off the bus, and the wolf thanks him, and the wolf and the narrator start having this conversation, and he basically asks, why didn't you defend yourself? And he's like, because I can't. Any cops come along, they're not going to believe me. The justice system does not support me in this.
Yeah.
We're second-class citizens. Any white guy comes along and says I'm causing trouble, that's who the cops are going to believe.
Right.
Next stop, some cops get on the bus, start questioning the wolf, saying, we got a call, said you were threatening people on this bus, you need to come with us. And it isn't the narrator that then stands up for the wolf, it's the other people on the bus. Start telling the cops, this wolf didn't do anything.
Sure.
And it's 2 or 3 other people tell the cops first, and then the narrator gets up and says, no, it's these other 2 guys, and, calling in a false report, that's the crime. You need to go talk to them.
Yeah.
And so the cops get off the bus, and it ends with a conversation and the wolf basically saying, it's not me who can change the system. It's people like you. You've got to, and it's by you standing up for me.
Kind of makes me cry a little bit.
And the other people on the bus will then support you.
Yeah. And so,
yeah.
This is, I kind of cried when I read this. Like, I'm crying even as you're explaining it. Like, I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah, it's impactful.
Yeah. So my first question I have for you is, at what point were you in the story when you were like, oh, it's about black people. It's about racism.
Yeah,
like it's about
when the wolf. Yeah, as soon as basically the wolf sits down and he starts talking about, the relationship. It was.
You mean after the guys already left?
Pretty obvious, huh?
After the 2 punk kids already left?
No. As soon as the wolf gets on the bus and the narrator starts talking about,
I totally didn't get it. By the way, I didn't
but
get
definitely. Yeah, as soon as the 2 punks get on the bus, it's definitely obvious that this is what's going on.
It wasn't to me. I didn't get it until the police got on the bus. That's how late in the story I was like, oh my God, it's an allegory for the way African Americans are treated in America. That's how late in the story it was before I got it, which is embarrassing for me, I probably shouldn't have said that, but yeah. What did you think of it? Did it make you cry? Did it affect you at all?
Definitely. It's I don't want to say it's heavy-handed. I felt like it was a little obvious, but in a good way. Again, not, and maybe that's better that it isn't obvious to some people. Because I think, the best allegories are put together that way, where it's a story that holds its own, but there's a deeper meaning that
it works as a story by itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the idea of whether or not there should be stories that are pushed around because the idea presented them is good, as opposed to ideas about suicide.
Sure.
This is a story that should definitely not afraid of the ideas in this, but I feel like some people probably are.
I thought this would be a great bedtime story and discussion if you had a 6-year-old.
Yeah, this would make a great kid's book.
Yeah, it would make a great kid's book. Yeah, even a very small picture book.
Picture book.
Be an outstanding picture book. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
About the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, about how we judge people and because you could have a conversation with a kid very easily about why did them why, and this is one of the things I thought was interesting about it is he talks about because the narrator, when the wolf first gets on, he's scared of the wolf too.
Yes.
Right. And he says, well, I've seen stuff on the news. I've heard stuff about wolves, although I've never had any bad interactions. And I thought that was interesting in how we talk about sort of portrayal in the media, right? How every time someone's getting arrested on TV, it's a black person, right? Every time there's a bad guy in a movie, it's a black person. Every time, and how these portrayals, they lead us to think I don't know. I mean, I've only had good experiences with black people, but I've heard that, and it's no, you haven't heard anything. You've had it shoved in your face your whole life and you've internalized it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same way he feels about the wolf, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tough one. Do you agree with the wolf's assessment that that he can't change people's minds? Only other, other, in this case, humans, or in the allegory aspect of it, white people can change other white people's minds?
Ooh, that's a dangerous question, because on one side you could very easily say, well, he can change people's minds, but he has to present himself in a societally acceptable way. So he has to continuously behave
better
not
better
even
than
better than everybody else.
yeah. He has to
You
even
know,
be
and
better than everyone else because he has to be essentially beyond reproach.
right. And I think if you look at that and then talk to someone who is in a minority
Yeah.
and tell them that's how they have to approach themselves, that's not really that doesn't seem right either. Like,
Yeah.
no, you shouldn't have to
He held to this different
again,
standard.
right. You're being held to a different standard as a second-class citizen.
Yeah. So I had this conversation once with a friend of mine, Kevin, who's African American, and I asked him because every time I ever saw him, he was always dressed up, like not
Mhm.
like in a t-shirt and cargo pants, but like in a a button shirt, slacks, everywhere, all the time. And I was like, dude, I'm like, what is it with you being always dressed up? And he's like, I don't want to look like a suspect. He's like, that's not something you have to think about. He's like, you know what a slovenly dressed white person is? A person. You know what a
Yeah.
slovenly dressed black person is? A criminal. He's
Oof.
like, and I'm aware of that, and every black person's aware of that. And we know it, and that's why we have to dress different than you. He's like, I'm never going out of the house in a t-shirt and cargo pants.
Oof.
And I was
Yeah.
just like, and it made it so, and I think he's right, unfortunately, but it made me so aware of like how
Right.
that sort of systemic racism makes people make different choices, like
Yeah, exactly.
instinctively. Yeah. I don't know. I felt bad that in this story the wolf couldn't stick up for himself, because there is, in a fairy tale, the good guys stand up in the bus and say, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Right.
But in life, man, I rarely see that happen. Like that happens in
Right.
children's
Yeah.
books. It doesn't happen in life books.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's why I wondered what you thought of, if you really believed that was the best methodology, or if that's just the fairy tale methodology you tell your kids.
But is that a problem that this is the fairy tale methodology? We have to present it in a way to kids. If you're looking at this as a children's story and how do you present this idea to kids,
Yeah.
that's a good idea to present to children, that, we may not as an individual do the right thing.
Hi, this is Colby, and you are listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. But you already knew that, didn't you? If you'd like to support what we do at After Dinner Conversation, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. That's right, for as little as $5 a month, you can support thoughtful conversations like the one you're listening to. And as an added incentive for being a Patreon supporter, you'll get early access to new short stories and ad-free podcasts, meaning you'll never have to listen to this blurb again. At higher levels of support, you'll be able to vote on which short stories become podcast discussions, and you'll even be able to submit questions for us to discuss during these podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being the kind of person that supports thoughtful discussion.
But is that a problem that this is the fairy tale methodology? We have to present it in a way to kids. If you're looking at this as a children's story and how do you present this idea to kids,
Yeah.
that's a good idea to present to children, that, we may not as an individual do the right thing. For a variety of reasons, but I don't know. Is that a good lesson to teach? As soon as somebody else stands up for someone, you need to also stand up for them. Or it's okay to stand up for them. At what point?
I understand why it's sort of the Malcolm X versus MLK discussion, right? And that's the do you win people to your side by letting them watch you get beat? Or do you defend yourself so that you can make clear that you're a human being that has a right to defend themselves? I don't know. I'm certainly not qualified to answer that question, but it stuck with me from the story.
Yeah, absolutely. From a societal standpoint, I think you have to have both.
Yeah.
You have to have both sides of that. You have to have people who are violently protesting and people who are not.
And people who are
peacefully
who are
protesting.
peaceful beyond reproach, so
Yeah.
that people are offended by the offenses done upon them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you about the story. If you were going to make this a children's story,
Mm-hmm.
would you leave the wolf as a wolf?
Yeah.
Or do you make it actually a person of color?
No, and I think this is the genius of the story. I think this is a story that I agree with you. I think it should be a picture book. I think it should be a book. I think it is of a caliber that deserves wide circulation, beyond our little publication. And I think the genius of it is that it's a wolf, because uh, as a white reader, I am reading this story unintentionally with all of the prejudices of the narrator, right? So if the story had been a black person got on the bus, I don't consider myself to be inherently prejudiced, but I am, because I've grown up in a society that has shown me things prejudicially.
Right.
And so
And so you would come to the
I,
story with your own prejudices.
right. And so I would be judging the black guy who got on the bus in this story, and I wouldn't be able to see beyond that to see I wouldn't be able to see it in the same way. You have to change it to a character that I don't have a bias against,
Okay.
right? That that
That's
that society hasn't programmed me for. And I think that's one of the geniuses of picking not just a different character, but also picking a wolf, because then when I read that the narrator says, "I've heard about wolves being dangerous," I can be like, "Oh, yeah, no, I can see where you would hear that. Like, they've
because
got big sharp teeth. They're wolves."
you do have a prejudice against wolves, but it's a different
Right.
kind of prejudice.
Right. Like if it had been a turtle that had gotten on the bus, I'd have been like,
That's not believable.
that's not believable, right? Like nobody's going to have a prejudice against a turtle. But
Yeah,
I
just
could
keep your
see,
fingers away from its mouth. You'll be
right,
fine.
right. But I could see in a society where I could see in this fictional society where they would have this prejudice against wolves, and so I think that's the genius of the story. Yeah, and I don't know. All these stories make me feel like, how many times have I been the person sitting on the bus who didn't say anything?
Right. And I
Um,
think that's the point of it.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, did it bring up those same questions in you, or do you not? Are you just like, no, like, I don't want to say that you're good, but like, I
Oh,
don't
no,
know.
it
Does it
definitely
affect you the
brings up
same?
the same.
Does
Yes.
it affects you in those same ways where it like makes you question, like, let me go through every moment of my entire life and see if like,
When was I
right,
when was I the person sitting on the bus not defending them?
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, it's genius that way. And I think the wolf is the making it the wolf is the genius of it. I also thought one thing that it doesn't bring up is he talked about how he looks scary, and the story didn't talk about, and maybe I understand why it didn't, like how that bias gets put into us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through movies and through books and through TV and through all those things. Um, because nothing looks scary, right? Like I look at the sun and it doesn't look scary, even though it's much more likely to kill me than anything else. Uh, I look at something else. I'm like, oh, that looks scary because, for 40 years, I've been exposed to things that have told me that it's scary.
Right.
Um, I don't know. It's interesting to me. This goes back to our last story about how we permit and don't permit what we're exposed, how we're so lenient about what we're exposed to, even being aware of how much what we're exposed to affects our biases.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So, I had a question, but I've forgotten it. Talking about, you said Kevin wearing
Oh yeah,
always nice clothes.
yeah,
Well, the wolf's wearing cargo pants and a Hawaiian shirt.
yeah. That's right. I forgot about that.
So,
Yeah,
would we have had the
yeah. That's on
the
the wolf
same
man. He should
initial
have dressed better.
right? Should he have been wearing a suit?
He shouldn't have to, but I understand why he would.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't mean should he have been, but in the same fashion, does what he's wearing also affect our interpretation of whether or not he's scary?
Sure. And
Does
I think that's the reason why they put him in the Hawaiian shirt. like
Right.
because there's a certain degree of absurdity to it, right?
Yeah.
Like a wolf in a Hawaiian shirt is just funny. Uh, and yet it's a wolf, right? And so, but here's the thing, right? Because how do you? And this is again, man, this is why the story's so great. Is how do you? Because we're coded to be like, oh, if I see a black man in a Raiders jacket and saggy shorts, saggy pants, I'm supposed to understand the code of what that means. Like he is a dangerous black man, right?
Right.
Um, and so the question is, how would you do you want to make that same sort of thing with the wolf in the story, or does that make it the allegory too
Make it too
obvious?
obvious.
Right. Or do you want to go the other way and make it absurd and that way make the bias seem even more absurd?
Right.
Yeah.
Where the close in right, because of the absurdity, throws us off.
Right.
You know,
It throws us
and
off.
we
Yeah.
maybe, or we get the idea that maybe he's not scary. And I think that's the reason he's wearing those clothes.
Right. Like if he'd have been wearing, if he'd been wearing ripped clothes and been like wearing the equivalent of like a homeless person's clothes,
Yeah.
right? And he'd have, been carrying like one of those giant chicken legs, like at the Renaissance Festival. We'd have been like, oh yeah, no, that dude could kill you, right? Like if he was eating one of those giant turkey legs on the bus with
Right.
his sharp wolf teeth, you'd be like, well, maybe they've got a reason to be afraid of him,
Mhm.
like because he shows that he's capable of hurting others, like that
Right.
he's
And so,
superior to us.
yeah, again, going back to
Yeah.
he has to be his best self.
Right.
So he has to present himself in a non-aggressive manner in all ways.
In all ways, at all times. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another story I read. Who's the guy who wrote On the Road?
McCarthy? The Road?
Kerouac, sorry.
Oh, the other one.
Yeah.
The Other Road.
Yeah. He wrote another book where he's in the South in the 1950s or 60s, and he's walking with a friend of his who's African American because, he's from the North and he's not super racist. And a drunk woman comes out, and she's drunk and she's falling all over. And the guy stops, the narrator stops to watch, and she starts screaming and yelling, and then she falls and like hits her arm on something and she's bloody, but she's basically just been so drunk and belligerent by herself that she's injured herself. And the police come and they're like, what happened? Who did this to you? And the guy looks and turns to his black friend to be like, did you see how crazy that is? This lady basically injured herself. She's so drunk. And he was already on the other side of the street. And so the guy then the narrator goes across the street and talks to his black friend and says, why did you walk across the street? He's like, white woman drunk in the South gets hurt. Who do you think the first person is they stop? And the black man that's within, 50 yards, right? I need to be farther away from this situation. And he goes, and the narrator says, that's quick thinking. And this is the part that always stuck with me of the story is the response, and this is based on a true story, is from the black man is, it's not quick thinking. I've been black all my life.
Oof. Yeah.
Right. And that's that was the one where I was like, oh man, that's rough. That's so rough. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's not an ethical question to discuss here because it's so obvious. I think the only one that I questioned is if the wolf's approach is the right approach.
Right. To not fight back.
Yeah.
Again, I think there are two sides to that. As you stated, the Martin Luther King or the other one I've already forgotten.
So you'd go 50-50, Malcolm X.
Yeah, Malcolm X. Sorry. No, because I think both are necessary.
Yeah.
In any situation of inequality.
Yeah. Well, we've had that conversation, right? That like those in power will very rarely voluntarily give up that power. Like they only give up that power because mass civil unrest forces them to give it away inch by inch, right? Towards equality. And so that's the thing I wonder, right? Like if there isn't that mass fighting back, like do the other white people on the bus, are they just like, nah, my position in life is pretty good and I'm not a black person, so I'm not a wolf.
Yeah.
Like maybe you have more inherent faith in humanity than I do. I don't know.
The ebbs and flows, I'm sure.
Right. Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh my God. All right, let me look at our questions. I think we're good for this one.
I
Like,
think we've answered most of them already.
yeah, I really love this story. I really hope it becomes a children's book.
Yeah.
Who is our person again? I don't even remember his name, but
Matthew Wallace.
Matthew Wallace. Yeah, man, he should absolutely turn this into a children's book. All right, so we'll call it quits. You've been listening to After Dinner Conversation. Like and subscribe. Visit us on Patreon. Go to our website. What's that website, Jeremy?
Afterdinnerconversations.com.
There you go. There's a magazine. There's books on Amazon. You can buy print books. They all come with discussion questions, and so it's super easy. So thanks for joining me, Jeremy, and hopefully next time we'll at least have
Yeah.
Sarah back.
Thank you.
She'll have caught up on her sleep and her life. All right. Hey, I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. You know, the vast majority of people listen haven't liked and subscribed, which means maybe it shows up in your algorithm, maybe it doesn't. So don't leave that to chance. Just go ahead and hit that button, and we'd sure appreciate that. And that way we can keep doing what we're doing, and you're not left to the whims of some algorithm. Thanks.